In 1863, during the height of the Civil War, the Ashworth plantation covered 3,000 acres in Virginia's Cumberland County. It sat about 12 miles southeast of Farmville, right next to the Appomattox River, where mist rose from the dark water each morning like ghostly fingers. The main house was a Georgian colonial building put up in 1828. It stood on a gentle hill with views over tobacco fields that reached toward the far-off Blue Ridge Mountains. Thomas Ashworth, then 52 years old, had taken over the plantation from his father in 1855. Unlike many owners who stayed in cities like Richmond, Thomas lived there full-time, saying he had to watch over everything himself. His wife Margaret had passed away from consumption 3 years earlier, so he was alone in the 14-room big house, with 47 enslaved people working for him. One of them was a young woman named Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, 22 years old, born right on the plantation. Papers found in the Cumberland County Courthouse in 1962 during repairs show that Sarah was bought by Thomas's father when she was just 6 months old, along with her mother Ruth. Unlike many enslaved women who labored in the fields, Sarah had worked in the house since she was small, especially keeping the upstairs bedrooms and the master's private rooms clean. According to a diary found in 1964 by researchers from the Virginia Historical Society, written by the plantation overseer Jonas Mitchell, Sarah was described as very beautiful, with light brown skin and green eyes that showed her mixed background. The diary, now kept in the Society's archives but closed to the public, had careful notes about daily life there, including more and more worrying remarks about how the master acted towards some house servants. The events that would shake the Ashworth plantation started on a hot, sticky Tuesday morning in late June 1863. Sarah was doing her regular tasks, changing bed linens and getting Thomas's bedroom ready, when he came back early from what was meant to be a full day checking the tobacco fields. The overseer's diary note from that day, in Mitchell's neat writing, said the master looked upset and had been drinking whiskey since breakfast, which was not normal even for him. What happened in that bedroom stayed secret for more than 100 years, hidden by silence and family shame. But bits of the truth came out later through different sources: a letter sewn into a quilt found in 1958, words recorded by a Union Army chaplain, and most important, Sarah's own story written in shaky handwriting on pages ripped from a hymnal and hidden under a loose floorboard in the servants' quarters. The chaplain's papers, found in the National Archives in 1961, had interviews with former enslaved people in the months after the war ended. Among them was Sarah's statement from October 1865, 2 years after the event. Her words, copied down in the chaplain's clear hand, showed a pattern of abuse that had grown worse than anything recorded before on Virginia plantations. In her testimony, Sarah said Thomas had been making more and more wrong comments about how she looked for months before that June morning. The other house servants had seen it, especially an older woman named Patience, who tried to keep Sarah safe by giving her different jobs. But Thomas would cancel those changes and say only Sarah could take care of his private rooms right. That morning, Sarah was leaning over the master's bed, smoothing fresh sheets that had been boiled and pressed at dawn, when she heard his steps on the wooden floor behind her. The room smelled of lavender water and old pipe tobacco that clung to everything. Sunlight came through thick damask curtains, making long shadows on the Persian rug that covered most of the floor. Thomas stood in the doorway for several minutes, just watching her work without a word. When Sarah finally felt him there and turned, she saw him staring with a look she later called both hungry and sad. His usual neat clothes were messy, his white shirt half unbuttoned, his hair not combed. The whiskey smell was so strong she could notice it from across the room. What he said next would stay with Sarah and later help show a hidden pattern of behavior that had gone on for years. In both her testimony and a letter she wrote later to her cousin in Philadelphia, Thomas spoke in a quiet, almost soft voice that made his words scarier than if he had yelled. The overseer's diary gave important background about the mood on the plantation then. Mitchell's notes showed a household where normal lines had slowly broken down under Thomas's growing strange ways. Servants talked about odd noises at night from the master's rooms, and a general feeling of worry that spread over the whole place. Even worse were Mitchell's remarks about other young women who had worked in the house before. 3 had been sold off suddenly in the 18 months before Sarah's trouble, all G, and called attractive in the records. No one explained why they left, just vague words from Thomas about discipline or not fitting housework. Ruth, Sarah's mother, had grown more and more afraid for her daughter in a letter written years later to a sister in Baltimore, found in 1959 among a dead minister's papers. Ruth told of her growing fear and her useless tries to keep Sarah safe. The letter showed that other mothers on the plantation felt the same worry about their daughters in the big house. The far-off spot of the Ashworth plantation made these dangers worse. It was away from the main road, surrounded by thick woods, almost like its own world. The closest neighbor was 5 miles away, and outside contact was only weekly trips to Farmville for supplies and monthly visits from a traveling minister who held services for the enslaved people. This distance meant little of what happened inside reached the outside. Thomas had total control over every part of life there, from jobs to punishment. The laws then gave no help to enslaved people, especially women, against their owners' actions. Sarah's story tells how Thomas came toward her slowly that morning, moving carefully like a hunter. He walked around the bed until he stood right in front of her, so close she could see broken blood vessels in his eyes and smell whiskey on his breath mixed with hair pomade. When he spoke, his voice mixed want and sadness in a way Sarah found more upsetting than plain force. His words were simple, almost every day, but in that setting they were terrifying. In the chaplain's copy, Sarah remembered Thomas saying, "You're beautiful. You know that?" while reaching to touch her face with fingers that shook a little. The moment hung between them like tight wire. Sarah, raised from childhood to obey white people, felt stuck between doing what she was told and knowing that giving in would lead to something much worse than regular punishment. Her mother had warned her in careful ways about how to act around white men, but nothing readied her for the strange closeness of Thomas's way, as if they were sweethearts instead of master and slave. This act of pretending care, this fake shared feeling, made the danger feel more shameful than if he had just used strength. It asked not only for her body, but for her to join in the idea that she wanted his notice. Sarah's answer, written in her later testimony, showed both bravery and smart understanding of her risky spot. Instead of giving in right away or trying to run, she tried to turn the talk back to her work. She said the other bedrooms needed doing, and that the late mistress's room, untouched since Margaret died, needed deep cleaning. Thomas seemed to think about her words for a second, his hand still near her face. Then he smiled, a look Sarah called both kind and awful, and said all other jobs could wait. He stepped closer, so near she felt heat from his body, and saw fine lines around his eyes from too many years and too much drink. The power in that room showed the bigger wrongs of slavery in a small way. Sarah had no law to help her, no one to complain to, no safe place to go. Her choices were give in or fight back, and both could bring terrible results. Giving in meant being hurt and losing the little control she had. Fighting back meant punishment, maybe being sold away from her mother and the only place she'd or worse. Thomas seemed to know her hard spot and enjoy it. In Sarah's words, he talked about her beauty like he was giving her something good by noticing, like his look was a favor she should thank him for. This mind game was maybe crueler than hitting her, because it made her take in the idea that she was just an object. The minutes after stayed burned in Sarah's mind forever. Thomas walked around her like he was judging something he owned, talking about parts of how she looked while she stood still. He spoke of her hair, braided in the way Ruth had shown her, and how the morning light made her green eyes shine. Most upsetting were his tries to talk with her about herself, like they were at a party instead of in a master-slave setting. He asked her favorite foods, her hopes for later, if she had ever left the plantation. These questions, harmless in other places, turned dark because of who they were. Sarah saw that Thomas was building a story where she wanted what was coming. He needed her to talk, to answer, to act like she agreed. Her quietness became a way to push back that clearly bothered him, shown by how his voice got sharper when she did not reply. The bedroom felt smaller as the morning went on. The heavy furniture, dark wood walls, portraits of Ashworth family staring from above, all added to a heavy feeling of control. This was Thomas's space, where his word ruled, and usual rules did not matter. Sarah's later private notes, found in 1967 inside her mother's Bible cover, gave more details about the meeting that were too private for her public words. These thoughts show the hard mind work she did, balancing danger and keeping her feelings safe. Her plan was a careful mix of going along and holding back. She answered his questions short, spoke only when told, but never said or did anything that looked like yes. This took huge strength and smart thinking, from someone taught all her life to bow to white people. Thomas seemed caught between his want and some leftover sense of right and wrong. Sarah saw him step close, then back, reach, then drop his hand. He talked about Margaret, his dead wife, about being lonely in the big house, about how quiet it was since she went. These personal talks were maybe meant to make closeness, but they only showed how wrong it all was. The other servants in the house surely knew something odd was going on. The overseer's diary says several noticed Thomas missing from his morning ways for too long. Patience, the older woman who tried to guard Sarah, stayed near the main stairs, clearly worried, but no one could step in without big risk of punishment. The plantation rules were strict, and stopping the master meant serious trouble. All they could do was stay ready to help after if needed. As morning passed, Thomas acted more wild. Sarah told of times he seemed normal, talking about plantation work or her tasks like nothing was wrong. Then he would fix on her body again, noting her breath, how she stood, her eyes. This mind battle wore her out more than force might have. Sarah had to stay sharp for every change in his mood while looking calm and willing. One bad word or move could make things worse in ways she could not handle. The peak came when Thomas made his wish clear. He moved so close their bodies nearly touched. He said he had watched her for months, thought about her, pictured her wanting him back. His use of willingly was especially mean because it showed how consent could not exist in slavery. Sarah's answer at that point shaped her whole life and helped bring down the Ashworth plantation in time. Instead of giving in or running, she looked straight in his eyes and said words recorded in several places, including the overseer's diary and her testimony. She told Thomas she knew what he wanted, but she could not act like she wanted something that would break her spirit. She agreed he controlled her body, but she claimed her own mind and soul, drawing a line his power could not cross. This caught Thomas by surprise. He expected yes or no fight, but Sarah's way of saying yes to his strength, while no to his wish, confused and angered him. For minutes he just stared, his face showing mixed feelings Sarah later called confusion, anger, and maybe shame. What happened next stayed in odd quiet. Thomas did not move on his threats or send her away. He stood in his bedroom, surrounded by signs of his money and rule, unable to choose what to do. This freeze broke when voices came from below. The overseer had come for his daily talk with Thomas, and regular plantation work called. Thomas suddenly remembered his place. He fixed his clothes, ran hands through his hair, and told Sarah to finish and go. But as she picked up dirty linens to leave, Thomas gave one last warning that hung over everything after. In Sarah's words, he said their talk was not done. He would keep thinking about what she said, and she should think hard about what her pushback might cost, not just her, but her mother and others she cared for. This warning showed the full reach of his power, and how every one there was at risk. Sarah's single stand had put the whole enslaved group in danger, a weight she carried forever. The days after were full of heavy strain that touched everyone. The overseer's diary notes strange actions from both enslaved people and Thomas. Work got mixed up, usual ways of talking felt tight, and it seemed something basic had changed in how the place worked. Sarah felt watched all the time, not only by Thomas, but by others who heard talk of the bedroom meeting. Some saw her with respect for her bravery. Others feared her stand would bring trouble to all. This split among the enslaved added more loneliness to Sarah's hard spot. Thomas seemed to struggle inside too. The overseer wrote he drank more and spent long times alone in his study. His ways with other servants swung between sudden kindness and quick anger over small things. More worrying, Thomas started asking about Sarah's family past and ties among the enslaved. He questioned others about her friends' talks and actions when alone. This showed he planned some bigger answer to her stand. The mind pressure on Sarah grew as she saw her one act had made a problem for everyone. The loneliness of slavery got worse with knowing her choice to stay human might hurt others. Her mother Ruth worried more as she saw the change. In later letters, Ruth called this time one of hard strain, when each day might bring something bad for her daughter's bravery. The other houseworkers tried to guard Sarah by making sure she was never alone in the big house. But this help had clear limits, and all knew if Thomas chose to act, little could stop him. 3 weeks after the bedroom meeting, Thomas made his next step. He called Sarah to his study one Thursday evening as the sun set behind the mountains. The study was his own space, full of books, papers, and years of running the plantation. Unlike the bedroom, this place stressed his full control, not any lover role. The desk, leather books, maps of landlines all reminded of the power Sarah had questioned. Thomas had clearly thought long about this talk. He spoke calm and clear, listing what her actions might mean for her and others. He named people and said how their lives could get harder if the place stayed upset. This was smarter than plain threats of hurt. By pointing to others' good, he tried to use Sarah's care for family and friends against her own stand. He bet her love would win over her no. Sarah's answer showed great moral strength and smart thinking. Instead of giving up or fighting harder, she suggested a different deal. In several sources, including a later letter to an abolitionist friend, Sarah offered to give in to Thomas's wants if he gave real safety to other at-risk women there. This changed a personal problem into a look at the whole system of sexual wrong on the plantation. Sarah asked Thomas to admit his pattern and agree to limits on how he acted with other enslaved women. Thomas's answer showed surprise at her clear thinking, and his no to any rule on his power. The idea that an enslaved woman could set terms, even to give herself, went against his view of order. The talks went on over more meetings the next week. Thomas seemed pulled between wanting Sarah and keeping full rule. Any deal that limited him set a bad example that might lead to more pushback. Sarah kept her own mind fight. By acting like equals in talk, instead of just power over powerless, she made Thomas face the human side of those he owned. This was maybe more dangerous to his beliefs than open fight. The end came from outside. A letter came from Thomas's brother in Richmond, saying Union soldiers were coming near Cumberland County and non-needed people should leave for safety. War suddenly made personal fight seem small next to staying alive. But the trouble between Thomas and Sarah had already started changes that lasted past the war threat. Sarah had shown that even total power had weak spots when met with moral bravery and smart plans. Others on the plantation who saw it would not forget. The overseer's notes from then show a community changed by Sarah's stand. The careful balance of control and giving in that kept things steady for years was broken, and no one knew if it could come back. Most key, Sarah made a record of her stand through her words to the chaplain, letters to family, and hidden writings. These papers made sure her story lived even if she did not, giving proof of slavery's horrors and the chance to stand against them. The coming war gave Sarah a chance to get away she might not have had. When Union soldiers reached the plantation in August 1863, she was quick to go to their safety, but by then, harm to the plantation's order could not be fixed. Thomas's actions became known not just to his enslaved people, but to nearby owners who heard talk of strange strain at Ashworth. His control weakened, his name hurt, his hold on the place badly shaken. The mind effect went past those there. Other enslaved women in the area heard Sarah's story and took strength from her stand. The thought that giving in was not the only way, that even the weakest could claim their human side in real ways, spread through family and friend ties. Years later, free in Philadelphia, Sarah wrote much about her time on the Ashworth place. Her book, put out in 1872 but stopped by those in power and now lost except pieces, gave one of the clearest looks at sexual wrong under slavery. These writings showed Sarah's stand fit a bigger pattern of small and group actions that broke the system from inside. While history often looks at big uprisings and runs to freedom, Sarah's story shows how daily moral bravery could hurt the system just as much. The Ashworth plantation did not last past the war. Thomas left when Union forces came near, and freed people with nowhere else took it over. The big house burned in 1864, by chance or plan no one knows, but the burning felt right for a place of so much pain. Sarah's later years had both good and hard times. She married another former slave, had children, and worked in teaching and church in Philadelphia's black community. But she never fully left behind the mind hurt from Thomas. Her family said she had what we now call post-traumatic stress all her life. The papers about Sarah's case spread across archives and family holdings for over a century before people started putting the full story together. The Virginia Historical Society's closed files, National Archives chaplain notes, and Sarah's family papers all added pieces to show both slavery's horrors and the chance to stand against them. Today's historians looking at these say Sarah's case questions simple stories about slavery that see only victims or big heroes. Her story shows the hard mind and moral grow. Enslaved people walked, the no-good choices they faced, and the great bravery needed to keep human worth in dehumanizing times. The bedroom meeting that started it all lasted only hours, but its effects spread through time. Sarah's family kept her writings and words, making sure her voice spoke over years about real American slavery and the strength of one person's moral stand to challenge big wrong systems. The physical signs are mostly gone. The Ashworth house is long destroyed. Tobacco fields grew back to woods, and landlines changed with new building. But the papers stay in archives and family collections, waiting for those ready to join the pieces of lives lived in hard extremes. Sarah Elizabeth Thompson's story reminds us that history comes not just from famous names and big events, but from regular people facing huge moral tests with bravery and smarts. Her stand against Thomas Ashworth's wrongs may not have changed the whole world, but it changed her small part of Virginia, and it gives a way to see how single acts of right can build into bigger change. In the end, the strongest part of Sarah's story may be how it shows the human side slavery tried to kill. Though treated as property, though facing choices with no good path, she kept her sense of self and her care for others. This may be the deepest kind of stand possible, refusing to give up being human even when all around tries to break it. The sound from that summer morning in 1863, when a young woman would not pretend violation was love, still rings wherever people fight to keep dignity against too much power. Sarah's voice, kept in broken papers and family memory, speaks over time about moral bravery and the lasting strength of the human spirit to fight being made less human